Greetings and salutations, friends and gamers of all stripes, and welcome to the fourth entry in the So You Want to Be a GM series, Planning Your Adventures. As always, I am GM Dave, your man behind the screen, here with a few steps that I think will be useful in guiding you through the process of planning out your adventures. But before we move on to that, we need to define what exactly an adventure is in the realm of tabletop gaming. So then, what exactly is an adventure? While this can vary slightly from table to table, I've found that adventure is best described as such: a single, brief, cohesive story experienced by the players over the course of one or a handful of sessions. I personally like this definition because, at least in my own view, it creates a clearer picture of what an adventure is while still leaving open the possibility for it to be bridged into other adventures to create an overarching campaign, which, to be clear, is something I do consider to be different from the adventure. Examples of an adventure would be things like one-shots, fully enclosed stories that take place over the course of a single session, or mini-campaigns, which usually last about 3 to 5 sessions. These games usually also take place in a single location. However, a multi-session crawl through a large dungeon might also qualify as an adventure, provided that the crawl is still relatively brief. A good example of this would be the classic and often re-released Sunless Citadel adventure from Dungeons & Dragons, wherein a party of new adventurers explore the Citadel for the first 4 levels of their adventuring career. Since the Sunless Citadel covers the first 4 levels of an adventurer's careers, it does land on the longer side of a single adventure. But since the entire thing is still focused on unveiling the secrets of the Citadel during your time there, the story is still kept brief and contained to that specific aim. Compare this to a more massive dungeon crawl like the classic PC game Diablo, where, yes, your adventure is confined to the exploration of Tristram's cursed cathedral and the many levels that extend beneath it. However, in your time there, you divert to explore other mysteries and dangers you discover along the way. Discovering the source of the cathedral's curse and then making your way down to purge it once you do is a single contained story that encompasses your entire time in Tristram. However, during your journey, your explorations can also lead you to seeking out powerful treasures to aid your mission, hunting other great evils awoken by Diablo such as the Skeleton King, and so on. In this case, your journey into Tristram's Cathedral makes up the overarching campaign of your game, while the diversions such as hunting down and slaying the Skeleton King make up individual adventures that help string that together. Now that we've defined what an adventure is compared to a campaign, we can begin to explore some steps that will help you craft a fun, memorable adventure. As usual, do bear in mind that these are steps that worked well for me, but you may find these steps aren't as helpful for you. That's perfectly fine, and there is no shortage of additional information available online to help you craft your adventures. With that said, let's move on to step 1. Step 1. The Big 5 Questions. Of all the steps I'll be listing here, this is the one that ties in most closely with campaign design as well. Remember, your adventures are self-contained stories meant to be shared in the relatively brief time of one or a handful of sessions. Campaigns will run considerably longer than this, but nevertheless they comprise a story as well, one that happens to be overarching as opposed to self-contained. As such, when starting the process of plotting your adventure, you're going to want to ask yourself 5 very important questions nearly all writers learn to ask at some point. Who, what, where, when, why? Brief though they are, these questions can be incredibly useful in determining exactly what elements are going into your adventure. For example, who? Who is the villain of your adventure, if there even is one? A rage-filled hobgoblin chief who holds a grudge against the people of a nearby town for taking his ancestral land? A sly and ruthless thief with a taste for the finer things he could never afford and deep envy for those who can? The ghost of a sinister wizard who died in prison, unable to rest thanks to his anger over how he died? If there is no villain planned for your adventure, who draws your players to it? Did someone hire them, or did they merely pick up hints along the way? What? What is the goal of your villain? What is it that they ultimately want? Perhaps the Hobgoblin Chief doesn't care about revenge, but only wishes to reclaim his ancestral lands. The ruthless thief clearly desires that which those in upper society have, but maybe he's more of a Robin Hood type, caring more for feeding the needy than lining his pockets in spite of his ruthlessness. Maybe the ghost seeks freedom once more, but since he's bound to the cell he died in, settles on vengeance against the grandchildren of his jailers. And if there is no villain, what are the goals of your players, or the people who set your players to this path? What can they find during their adventure that will help them achieve their goals? What obstacles will they face on the journey to achieve their goals? Why? Why is everyone doing what they're doing, players, villains, and major NPCs alike? What is the motivation behind their goals? For the Hobgoblin Chief, What if he sought to chase the townsfolk away and raze their homes because the hill they built upon was actually a sacred burial site for his people? Maybe the thief, for all the good he does with his ruthless thuggery, truly is driven by base greed and envy, and only plays up the Robin Hood act to get the support of the lower classes on his side when he needs to hide away. Does the ghost, who was so powerful and influential in life, have his spitefulness grow because his pride was wounded when mundane men not only managed to capture and imprison him, but also see to his death within the cell? Properly exploring the motivations of all NPCs in your games, not just your villains, as well as bearing the motivations of your player in mind, will enable you to craft a more fully fleshed out characters that make your adventure feel both richer and more memorable. Where? Where will this all be taking place? Deep in a forest packed dense with massive evergreens? Within the slums of a large, wealthy city? Perhaps inside a half-collapsed prison that used to house the region's worst criminals? Don't forget to ask why it's taking place here as well, especially if there's no villain involved. What is it about the place that you have chosen makes it so important? Why should the players be drawn there? When? This question doesn't just have to do with when you'll be playing the game, although that certainly is a factor to consider. Rather, when are the events in your adventure taking place? This can range from details such as events taking place on a particularly important date, like the Duke's daughter being kidnapped on her 16th birthday, for example, to lining it up with some major celestial event. Come midnight, the planets will align, and the Great One will rise from his prison beneath the earth. To a deadline the players have to meet. You've got till dusk to bring us a ransom. If you don't, we cut something from your boy every hour till it comes. To something as simple as the time of day it takes place. After all, it's generally easier to see during the day than it is at night. And although the greater details of when usually come up more in campaigns than they do in individual adventures, considering the impact of the time of events on your adventures can lead to a lot of really fun and tense moments for you and your players. Okay, you've asked the big five, and now you have the basic details of your adventure in place. Now it's time to move on to the next step. Step 2. Put your adventure together. The details you come up with when asking the big five are the building blocks that will make up the foundation of your adventure. With them in mind, it's time to begin putting those details in their place. This is where you'll be putting together your NPCs, gathering the info you need on monsters, traps, and other hazards, putting together your dungeon map or maps, and so on. Remember though, the pieces you work in should work with the details you came up with in step 1. If they don't, then they probably don't belong in this adventure. So now that you've got all your pieces in place, you know what your friends and enemies will face, the traps and dangers you've prepared, the motivations behind your NPCs, and so on. Everything is set and you're ready to play, right? Wrong. Step 3. Review. Before you start to play any adventure you've put together, you need to critically review what you've made first to make sure that you've answered 4 key questions that will help you to preserve the fun at your table. 1. Are the events in my adventure flexible enough for me to change them if needed? Remember that your players are the largest source of surprise at your table. If you tell them to go right, they'll make a quarter circle turn back in the other direction and down a well. You tell them the adventure is at the cathedral, they'll go check out the ruined keep they passed on the way to town. The pieces in your adventure need to be malleable enough that you can switch things up on the fly if needed and still run what you've planned. 2. Does what I've come up with provide what my players asked for? As the GM, you're not just making adventures for yourself. You're making a playground for your players, a place for them to explore the worlds and ideas you've come up with. As such, it's important that you bear in mind the wants and desires they shared with you when you all discussed what it was you wanted to play. If they want high adventure and you fashioned a slow-paced mystery full of twists and turns, well then it's time to go back to the drawing board and change things up. Remember, you can include elements of things they didn't suggest into your games, such as sneaking a touch of mystery into that high fantasy adventure in order to surprise your players with a shocking reveal they didn't expect. But if your entire adventure undermines what they asked for, then it's time to rethink how you put those pieces together. 3. Does my adventure provide a challenge for all of my players, so each of them can share the spotlight? This can be trickier to achieve than most other parts on this list, especially if you don't know what your players are playing, a common mistake among new GMs. As such, this is something you'll come to understand more with time and practice, but it's still very important to bear in mind at the start of your GMing career. You want to provide a variety of challenges to your players, ones that will allow them to explore more aspects of their characters and character sheets than just combat. What's more, especially if this is the first session, you want to ensure that what you're putting in front of your players isn't so hard that they can't overcome it. A good challenge makes for a lot of fun. A challenge that seems impossible, though, only feels unfair. 4. Can I manage everything that I planned? Don't forget, all the little pieces that you put together are pieces you have to make work. So be careful. Don't spread yourself too thin. If you don't feel comfortable handling a big battle with the villain of the adventure commanding a dozen minions, don't put that in. If the details you put together for your town start looking bloated when you read back on them, trim them down to the essentials. You are the gear that turns the cogs in your game. Don't wear yourself out by trying to turn too many at once. With these questions finally answered, we can at last move on to the final step in planning our adventures. Step 4. Edit and review again as needed. Okay, yes, step 4 really isn't a lot of ways just a repeat of step 3. However, this is such an important part of putting together a great adventure that I felt it genuinely necessary to include it as its own step. With your initial review done, you need to determine what, if anything, needs to be edited and then do just that. Trim whatever needs trimming, change whatever needs changing, and then when you've done that, go back and review it again, repeating the process as often as it's needed. Remember, we don't need every little detail of our world to be present. We just need the building blocks, enough details for the players to get an idea of the world they're playing in so that they and you both can shape it with their actions. With that, we've explored what are, in my view, the 4 key steps to building your own great adventures. However, this topic is such a massive one that it couldn't possibly be fully covered in just 4 steps. And so before we close out the video, I'd like to leave you with a few tips that will hopefully make the daunting task of designing your games easier still. 1. Avoid burying yourself in too many details, even in adventures meant to be complex by design. 2. Use your notes. Tailor your game to your players and their characters to create truly memorable moments. 3. Make an outline for your adventure. A simple checklist or skeleton that tracks the order of events you planned can help you more clearly keep your details in order. 4. Include a variety of challenges beyond combat. RP challenges, skill challenges, dangers requiring various types of saving throws will give all of your players more chances to shine in the game. 5. New GMs? Try to keep your adventures relatively simple and straightforward. Allow yourself to get comfortable with your game. 6. Don't start in a tavern. It's boring, it's overdone, and it allows your players too much room to wander and undermine your plans. Instead, start as close to the action as possible. 7. Without revealing secrets, talk to your players while designing your adventure. They might have interesting and appropriate ideas that you didn't consider. 8. Talk with members of the community at large. Pick their brains for ideas, inspiration, and assistance with parts you're having difficulty tackling. And 9. Don't be afraid to borrow. Whether it's from movies, books, video games, or whatever else, borrowing ideas and shaping them into our adventures is absolutely okay. That's about all the time we have for today, friends and gamers. As usual, I hope you found this video to be both useful and informative, and I would love to hear your feedback and suggestions on this topic. New GMs, have you used a method like this before and found it helpful? Older GMs, what tricks and tips have you come up with that are helpful? Please feel free to share your experiences in the comments below. I welcome discussion with open arms. In the meantime, I am GM Dave, your man behind the screen, signing off. Roll high, roll play well, and game on.